Welcome back to another lesson with me, Mr. B. In today's lesson, we're going to learn about some of the critical concepts that'll give us some context to Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun. Today, we're going to review and or learn about the following concepts: white flight, blockbusting, and redlining. So white flight is a phenomenon that took place post-World War II, around the 1940s. White flight is a form of institutional racism in which white people fled cities with large minority populations. Some white communities were concerned about having African Americans in the neighborhood. They thought that would decrease the value of their homes and start introducing violence into those areas. So with white flight, there were these things called restrictive covenants, which referred to contractual agreements that prohibited the purchase, lease, or occupation of a piece of property by a particular group of people. These racial restrictive covenants were used to keep those particular people or African Americans from purchasing or renting homes in certain areas. So around 1940, 80% of the land in LA and Chicago was not eligible to be leased or owned by African Americans. And this kind of segues us into the next concept, which is known as... So blockbusting is the practice of persuading owners to sell their property cheaply because of the fear of another ethnic group or social group moving into the neighborhood. And then those who are persuading the owners to sell their property are profiting by reselling at a higher price to those that are moving in. It's basically saying that real estate agents fed into the racism of white homeowners, or the white flight that was occurring. They pressured them to selling their homes quickly and for cheap so that they could avoid living with ethnic minority groups, in this case, African Americans. Then those same agents would sell the house after, and specifically increasing the price for the incoming black families that were moving in. What does this all mean? Agents and bankers, they manipulated the mortgage programs intended to correct past racial injustice. So then black families would be trapped in high-cost mortgages that were difficult to maintain, and they were more likely to lose their homes, in which destabilizing families and communities even more, thus displacing the African American community to seek housing elsewhere. And then this cycle of poverty kind of continues, looking for another house where agents or bankers are kind of doing them dirty, selling them these underkept houses for more money. Which transitions us over to the next concept, redlining. Redlining is a term that community organizers created to explain the methods of how bankers used to draw red lines around certain neighborhoods, and they refused to offer home loans in those specific areas. So as we just learned about blockbusting, if a family is getting displaced from losing their home after paying, that high price, then they're going to seek somewhere else to buy. They're already at another disadvantage where these agents are drawing like physical red lines around maps to be like, oh, you can't take a loan here, or you can't buy a house here. They were restricting families from moving into certain areas to feed into that institutional racism that we talked about of the white flight and also white homeowners that didn't want their urban neighborhoods to change. What about redlining in San Francisco? So if you look at this map over here, if you look at the red areas, it says they are deemed 4th grade or hazardous. And this is the original redlining map of San Francisco. And I'm not sure if you can see it very well on the video, but green says the 1st grade of the least hazardous, blue is 2nd grade, and then yellow is 3rd, then the red or pink is 4th. And then the rest of the areas that are gray, it says industrial commercial area. The colors represent different tiers of how hazardous each of the locations are in San Francisco. So now let's look at this map of gentrification and exclusion in San Francisco. Gentrification, in case you don't know, is the process whereby the character of a poor urban area is changed by wealthier people moving in. Housing is improved, new businesses are built, but they're built over either the homes or buildings of things that used to be there, which then displaces the current inhabitants of that area. And so if we go back to that map, we can see that this map is showing us the purple represents the gentrification, or the areas where something new is being built, again, like houses or businesses, and where low income displacement is occurring. So again, where gentrification is happening, that's where folks that already live there are being pushed out by new businesses and new houses, and thus they can't afford to move back in. Now, we're going to take a look at where gentrification is overlapped with the previous map of what is deemed 4th grade hazardous. Check out this overlay. As we can see, the purple is predominantly in areas that aren't quote unquote safe or green or 1st grade. In fact, 87% of today's gentrifying areas were rated as hazardous. And this statistic has probably risen since I've created this slide deck. If we look at where the purple areas are kind of translucent or the opacity has been increased, kind of see that it's overlapping with a lot of these red areas. And as we've seen in San Francisco today, for example, like where the Chase Center is built or where there's new houses in those areas or apartment complexes, they've all been built over housing or grocery stores or things that the communities needed in those areas with housing or business spaces to rent that people can't necessarily afford unless you're some, multimillionaire. So how does this connect to A Raisin in the Sun? In 1938, Hansberry's family moved to a white neighborhood that was violently attacked by neighbors. They refused to move until the court ordered them to do so, which they challenged in court. This case also made it to the Supreme Court, which is known as Hansberry v. Lee, which ruled restrictive covenants illegal. However, it took years before the ruling was enforced. We'll be making many references to these ideas as we read about the Younger family and their dreams deferred. If you haven't already, go check out lessons 5.3 to 5.6, where we read some Newsella articles to help us take a deeper dive into the historical effects these concepts had on Americans. I hope that overview of critical concepts we learned in class was useful. Thanks for tuning in to another lesson with me, Mr. B, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.